Welcome to tonight's episode of Ramblemancy. Um, yeah. Let me just make sure. Okay, cool. Okay, in theory, you can hear me right now. Um,
In theory.
in theory. Anyway, hi everybody. Welcome to Ramblemancy. Tonight we're gonna be talking about GM and player communication, a topic near and dear to my heart. Cause usually whenever like 9 times out of 10 if somebody asks a question about like a problem with their players, the problem is communication, like 9 times out of 10.
Hmm.
So it's important, it's a very important thing. So we'll get to that. Before we do that, I think we have announcements. I don't know, I don't who even runs this channel, like who I don't know what's going on
I don't
ever.
know. I'm gonna go see actually if I can talk to the people in charge
Okay.
real quick and
Sounds
find
good. All
out.
right.
So
Well,
I'll be back.
see you when you get back. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Let us know what they
Uh-huh.
say.
I'm
John's off to talk to the
suspicious.
money people. I know, right? After after
I'm
last week,
suspicious.
it's yeah. Is John
Yep.
getting us back for not or is this just a really committed bit? I
This
There was one time in college where I somebody made a bad joke and I like pretended to be offended and like walked out of the room. And then when I was outside of the room, I remembered that I was supposed to be somewhere and just kept going and didn't come back for like 3 hours. But yeah, um, I don't think there's a bit involved here, but
Oh,
John is wearing his headphones so he can hear all of this. So like I could imagine like an impromptu bit happening where he like leaves, talks to a roommate and be like, hey, want to, like
oh boy.
I well, anyway, John went to go talk to the money people. So we probably have announcements. I don't know.
Well,
Well,
I think we're currently working on our next behind the roll. Sorry, beyond the roll, behind the scenes, beyond the roll. Um, okay.
welcome.
Sorry.
Did you change
You
your
just brought
shirt?
Hello.
me.
Is that what happened?
What?
Did you change your shirt?
No, I'm me. Change
Okay.
my
Anyway.
shirt. I've,
Anyway.
I've been here the whole time.
All right. Okay. Anyway.
I the casual the casual observer will know that
um,
this is the same outfit that John wore last week.
Great. Excellent.
These are rolled up so
oh,
far.
I
Holy
was
shit, they're
not
this tiny.
actually paying
I
attention
didn't.
before, so um
You just brought me back a week.
Hmm.
surprise, Bree and Crystal are both in the closet this time. They're going to come out
Yeah,
any
both of
second
them.
now. Anyway,
Can you
Freeman,
imagine?
continue.
Right. We are currently working on our next beyond the roll,
Mhm.
with rebooting some old programming, the original programming, some D&D, bringing in some new characters, and maybe
Mhm.
seeing some old characters too. That's
Yeah.
going to be what we're working on currently.
Yep. That's pretty much it. Like I don't think there's actually anything exciting happening right now other than our like usual exciting fare.
Mhm.
Um so yeah, pretty normal week this week.
Yeah.
Turns out our announcements are super uninteresting.
Mhm.
They're less announcements and more like, hey, remember when we were doing all the stuff that we always do? Um, that's it. That's the whole announcement. Anyway, um, that's what I got. That's all I got. John, what do you got for us? I saw you typing and I
What?
knew you weren't ready.
what what do any of us have for each other, Lucas? But love and respect here among the Ramble fam.
I had no idea where you were going with that, but
I didn't either. I was just talking and hoping that coherent words came out of my mouth, which is usually what I do when I'm
mhm,
thrown under the bus.
mhm, mhm.
So, no, actually, so tonight's topic of conversation, at least the thing that we're going to start on before we wildly deviate, as per the name of the show, is communication between players and GMs. This, of course, is referring mostly to tabletop role-playing games where there is one GM and between 1 and 75 players.
That's technically true, so I'll let you have that. That is technically true. Between 1 and 3 million players. Yes, I guess.
Theoretically, please do not run a game for 75 people at once. We did 10 at Gen Con 2019, and I think Lucas almost died. But yeah, so communication between players and GMs, because at the table, players and GMs they're playing the same game, but they are playing it a little bit differently. And there's, I think, a lot of expectation that winds up in the GM of kind of being a lot of the initiative to kind of facilitate that communication. But there's a lot of ways actually that I think what I'm actually trying to get at here, I think, is that communication can feel like, you know, the GM is like the manager for the game in a lot of ways. But I think something, maybe a place to start this conversation would be like, does that have to be the case? I think the answer is no. Like that's kind of a communication is a two-way street at the table, right? Players can pitch their GMs things and GMs can pitch players things, you know. So like that communication is a two-way street. The GM is not an island.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about this a lot when I'm thinking about communication, which is like the idea that I think what happens particularly early on in groups, like not in the game necessarily, but in like a GM's career as a GM, in their run as a GM, it's easy to forget that while you are playing a game of make believe, right? Like you are still a group of people around a table, and so like there's communication that has to happen about the game. There's communication that has to happen in the game. But there's also communication that has to happen like around, like outside of the game, right? And I think that's the thing that often gets neglected, particularly by like inexperienced players or GMs, right? You forget that just because you are playing a game doesn't mean that the only communication you can have is like in the game. So like common problems that I see like expressed often on excuse me, on like on the internet, on Twitter, on, you know, subreddits or whatever, are where they like the obvious answer is like, well, there isn't, I don't see this feels like a non-issue to somebody who is like familiar, but to like somebody who's not necessarily as familiar with running games, like the idea that the answer to your problem is to just sort of like stop everything and just say, all right, listen, like I've done it, like you've probably even seen me, I think I'm sure I've done it in Infinite Horizon, where I'm just like, all right, let's stop for a second because I can see we're getting confused. I'm above game here, and then I just explain to them what the situation is, or I'll like say, you know, like I think I've even done it in home games. I'll be much more likely to stop the game, be like, hey guys, listen, I like y'all aren't letting so and so speak, or like, you know, I don't know, any number of things. I don't. It's hard to say without a specific example, but like that kind of literally stopping and not just communicating like when the game is over or like before or after, but like even in the middle, just like stopping the game to communicate. And I think that's something that's often overlooked because it's like, are we allowed to do that? And the answer is yes, you are. You're a group of people sitting around a table, like playing a game that is essentially a conversation. So
yeah, you are allowed, any one person in the game is allowed to break and be like, okay, above table real quick. Like you are allowed to do that. even on like frankly, I was gonna say, it's there's maybe a little bit more pressure to not do that on camera, but frankly, a lot of very successful actual plays, you do still see that happening during the game.
Mhm.
Like, it's not uncommon to see like, I don't know, Brennan Lee Mulligan or something like go like, there is no conceivable way that you can do this. Like this is a ruling, or like, above table, like this isn't happening, or above table, this is what's occurring right now. And that's like, that's like a really, something that we talk about here often is the tendency of a lot of people who are trying to teach writing or storytelling is to push the idea that you have to show, not tell, all the time. And it's a super frustrating notion. We've been over this ground a lot of times. I can see Lucas like pulling out the soapbox to stand on.
No, it's okay.
Because
I put it back.
because the gist of it
There's
is
a lot of TTRPG books on the soapbox right now, so
That's
we're gonna
fair.
leave it
Oh
where
yeah,
it
yeah,
is.
yeah. It's very like it involved a lot of moving to get it out. But the reality is that sometimes, in the way that sometimes it is appropriate to show instead of telling, it is also appropriate to just say it. And you can describe the effect of a light bulb turning on and the room filling with light, or you can say they turned on the lights.
Because it would never, nobody would ever be confused if a light turned on in a room. Nobody would ever be confused about A, what that looks like, or B, if coming from the other side, if the light came on. Nobody would ever be confused about what had just happened. Like, it was dark and now it is not dark. Clearly a light came on. You don't need to like describe suddenly the room was visible, and like in a sudden flash, like trying really hard to avoid using the word light. And anyway, it's just it's detrimental to your efforts.
Of luminance, like you just tell them the light turned on, like, and now the light is on, there's light in the room, the character can see.
Yeah.
We
And
understand.
suddenly I'm blinded and my orbs are rendered useless.
That's an incredible callback. Absolutely incredible callback. Did we
Wanted
get?
to see if we
I'm pretty sure we got rid of those commands.
damn.
We
Wow.
cleaned out our commands a while back.
I couldn't remember if that one made the cut or not, and on the off chance, I wanted to see if it was still in there.
That is an incredible callback.
That's such a good callback.
Oh.
That was such a good fundraiser bit.
Oh my god. For those unaware, a couple years ago, we were doing a fundraiser on this stream, and we read a particularly awful book. I hesitate to even call it that. Short story? But I don't know, honestly. Novella, maybe? I don't know.
Novella.
Called The Eye of Argon, and it's pretty fucking terrible. But yeah, we were playing a game with it that was sort of like popcorn style read. Anyway, it's not important. If you want, you could probably find it pretty easily if you wanted to go back.
There are quite a few clips of that stream, including several of me and Bree doing like a co-op drawing limerick stream, and in which I wrote some absolutely filthy limericks with words crowdsourced from chat donations. So
we streamed like 8 hours that day, didn't we?
We did.
Yes,
we did.
That was the thing that we did.
Mm-hmm.
I think remember about that
with like
often.
Multiple different like segments and schedulings and like coordinating. It was a lot. Let's
we
not
pulled
do
that together in like a week and a half.
It was less than that. I think it was literally just a week.
Sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway.
Sorry. All of us are just finally far enough away from it that we're like, holy shit, what did we do?
All to say is to you can pause in the middle of your game and just say, hold on, I'm confused.
Yes.
Yes. And you as the GM, when you see that your players are confused in a way that is maybe not productive or fun, you can stop the game for a second to explain what is happening, or point out like where they have missed something or something that their characters would know. Because like, even in terms of the fiction, most games assume the players are competent, or assume that the characters are competent. But there are things that the players will not know that their characters would, and it's okay for you as the GM to be like, your character would know this.
This is one of those things. This gets us into sort of one of my biggest like GM pet peeves, which is And this is where I tend to get very opinionated when it comes to things about uh like in when it comes to TTRPGs, when it comes to like issues of, poor sportsmanship on the part of either the GM or the players.
Mhm.
And one of the ways that it just really gets me the most is where, like, in game, the GM will not offer a certain amount of grace to the players who may have forgotten a detail, um, where their characters would absolutely not have forgotten that detail, and it has a drastic impact on how they do what they're doing, right? Like, it's one thing if your player's like absolutely not engaged and not paying attention and whatever, then it's like, all right, well, listen, like, that's your job to pay. Like, that's sort of part of the social contract of TTRPGs. Like, it's sort of your job to be paying attention to any relevant pieces of information. But it's another when they're like plugged in and focused, but they get distracted and forget like a detail or something that their character would never have forgotten. Um, and so when the GM then uses that to be like, well, you didn't say this, knowing full well that like they would have made a different choice had they known that, had they remembered that thing. And I
Mm.
find that kind of thing profoundly unsportsmanlike and frankly, sort of a detestable behavior, frankly. I don't know.
Yeah.
And also, and this is maybe more of an opinion than like any sort of statement about of like ethics or whatever, but like, if that is what you feel that you need to do to resort if that's what you feel you need to resort to in order to challenge players, then I think that is a demonstrates a lack of imagination. um
It's just a little bit of the energy of like playing pretend as kids, and one kid is just like, well, my gun is bigger and it shoots your gun's bullets out of the air. um
Hmm.
that kind of it's like that same kind of behavior where like, yes, you've fallen exactly into the trap that I've devised for you just now.
like,
um
I've seen this on like, um this is a thing that I started to see more in like campaign 2 of Critical Role. Couldn't say for campaign 3 because I haven't watched any of it, and probably won't. um but like, something that I noticed is that you'd have these instances where a player would declare their intentions for something to do, right? Like, they'd have a plan that they would coordinate with another player, and they would declare their intentions, and then when it came around to their turn, because combat in TTRPGs in general tends to be it's so long, and like in between rounds it's difficult to like remember what you were going to do, especially if you're engaged in what the other people at the table are doing. If you're like
mhm.
focused on that and then it comes to your turn, like, who hasn't been in that situation where it like comes around to your turn, you're like, "Oh, shit. I forgot
Yeah.
how, like, I wasn't paying attention to how quickly that was coming around."
Hmm.
Right? And I saw this happen many times where a player would declare their intention for their next turn, and based on something that another player had done that they had coordinated with, and then when it came to that turn they went to do it, and before any dice had been rolled they're like, "Oh wait, shit, that's not what I was going to do. I was going to do this other thing." And I would see Matt go like, "Well, you already said you were going to do this," and that just bugs the fuck out of me. Like, no dice were rolled, and like,
Yeah.
and they already
Hmm.
said that thing. Like, maybe the player forgot that that's what they were going to do, but the character absolutely would not have forgotten that, right? And that's
Mhm.
the kind of thing. Like, this is not to like put Matt Mercer on blast or anything like that, or Critical Role at all. It's just an example of where I've
Hmm.
seen it before, of the kind of thing that I've seen that just like, or like, I don't
Yeah.
know,
Hmm.
like, if punishing or punishing a player for like not specifically declaring an intent to, or not specifically declaring something that their character absolutely would not have forgotten to do, you know?
Mhm.
And it's like, "Well, you didn't say that you were going to do that." It's like, shut up. Just shut up.
Yeah. Like, it's one of those things where, like, okay, so we're in a dangerous swamp and my character has been like as much as they can trying to stay to dry ground. And I say that is what my character is doing at the beginning, but then like we enter perhaps a new area or something, or like something else happens and I say like, I take a few steps forward and the GM and then the GM jumps on you like, you didn't
Yeah.
say that you stuck to dry ground. An alligator grabs your leg. I'm like, okay, you didn't even have me roll any dice to see if my character could maintain their footing or something.
Right.
Like if there was a roll here, I would feel like this was warranted, but like just
So
playing
it's
gotcha with the narrative always feels bad to
and
me.
it's a little bit to like kind of take your analogy from before, John, and actually use a different one in this place. It a little bit is more the energy of for example, just as a random example, having an exam where you are like I don't know, for example, I don't know, just as a random example, in like a Shakespeare class where at the very beginning of the semester for like 2 minutes, not even 2 minutes, less than a minute, the professor pointed out, like, I'm talking like the very first class, the professor pointed out like in the book where there's a map of London, like, but made it seem like it was as like reference material. And then on the midterm, there was a question where you had like, that was a significant portion of the midterm where you had to like draw the map of London of Shakespeare's London from memory with like, indicating points of interest. Yeah, just hypothetically speaking, right? As a hypothetical,
hypothetically, like if a college English professor teaching a Shakespeare class were to do that,
Mhm.
it would be really like kind of unsportsmanlike,
Mhm.
very very irritating as a
That
student.
son of a bitch.
And like never brought it up again. Like never brought up the map ever again. Like just pointed it out on the first day of class and then never brought it up again. And then on the midterm it was like, "Hey, draw it from memory." It's like,
What?
one, what does that have anything to do with like the subject matter? And two,
Hypothetically,
Melissa, this isn't going to be on the test. Is on the test.
yeah.
this hypothetical son of a gun. No, but this was I've heard this story before.
Yeah, right. Like and it's that same energy, right? Like it's the same kind of thing. It's not acceptable there. It's not acceptable in. Why would it be acceptable in your D&D game where the goal is to have fun, right? Like, I don't know.
Wow.
I was looking at. Hermes said, "There's no reason to punish a player because games are played every other week. Forgetting to use a specific ability their character has as their job. Lore is finicky for different players." Yeah, exactly. Like that's.
Sometimes it's 25 minutes between turns,
Yeah.
right? And in that time, you are communicating with the other players above table. The situation on the battlefield changes if you're playing a tactical game like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or something like that, or like a hex crawl game or something.
Mm-hmm.
You may have taken, like, your character may have like a reaction or like things that you can do in between turns that you've done. So there's so many things that can happen between one turn and another, or between like a few minutes within the narrative. Like another character might have a scene or like an aside with somebody else, and you come back and now all of a sudden you're doing this thing. Like you, the player, have kind of forgotten that 15 minutes ago you said, okay, I need to stay to dry ground, but your character absolutely remembers that they are in a swamp and need to stay on dry ground.
Yeah.
So like that's one of those things where it's sort of important to it's where I think it's okay, for instance, as a player, to communicate to your GM, hey, like, I remember I said a few minutes ago that my character was doing that. Like, if you want me to make a roll, sure, but like, I think that's one of those instances in the player where, like, as a player, you're more than at liberty to be like, hey, wait a minute.
Right. Yeah. Like. Yeah. There's something for sure to be said about communication. Like me as a player, I think I used to be a worse TTRPG player than I am now. But by which I mean I would get really. I don't think I was fun to have at the table for my GMs because I like every time I would just be like, I would get into GM brain and be like, well, if I was running this game, I wouldn't do this, or I wouldn't, right? And like I wouldn't make it a big deal, but I would clearly be like unhappy with certain things that were happening, right? And like because it's not how I would have ruled or something like that, right? It's not like a ruling that I would not have made. But the reality is that in many of those instances, I think there were positive ways for me to communicate how I was feeling, and I just didn't feel like that was a thing that I was allowed to do, which not because of the GM or the other players or anything like that, just because like at the time that was just not something that would have occurred to me to do. I think the the clearest example that I can remember from this is back when we were playing that 3.5 game. I feel like John already knows exactly what I'm going to say. There was a moment where like my character did something that like got him arrested, and it wasn't like a big deal, right? Like not like really illegal kind of thing. It was just like a, you know, like they were gonna hold me like overnight or something like that. And like the players knew, uh, that their characters did not, and then so my character basically was like sitting in a jail cell because he was a lawful character who like I understand that that's not necessarily like universal to all lawful characters, but the way I was specifically playing my character, he would have just gone along with it, because he knew that he'd broken the law, and now like lawful neutral. You know you're breaking the law, you knowingly break the law, and then you knowingly accept the punishment. Like that's lawful neutral in my mind. Anyway, it's not that you don't break the law. It's that if you break the law, you accept the punishment. Without anyway, the point is, my character was sitting in a jail cell while the rest of the party started trying to like formulate a plan to break me out. Whereas if they had just waited and done nothing, then the GM would have been like, all right, well, we passed time, and the next morning you're released. And then, would have, right? That's what probably should have happened. What actually happened is that the rest of the party spent the entire session basically trying to formulate a plan to break my character out of prison or whatever. And the result was that I did literally nothing the whole session because I was in a jail cell. What was I going to do? I wasn't going to break out. Mm-hmm. So, like, I was in a jail cell. And, like, I think that was... And the GM and I have talked about this since then. Like, he said that was, like, a failing on his part for not communicating. For not communicating to the players, and for not, like, sort of reining that in. But also, like, a failure on my part as a player to communicate. Like, I don't know why, in my mind, did not occur to me to like, stop everything. Like, hey, guys, you realize that by doing this, you're making it so that I won't play the game tonight. Like, every moment that you spend trying to break me out of this situation that I will get out of anyway myself, just is a moment that I am not spending playing the game. I could have done that. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, it didn't occur to me. I don't know why.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where people very easily get caught up in like the role playing and like the kind of like fiction of the game and thinking of it as like a movie or a show or something like that. And it is like it's a game that we are all playing together. And so like you can, just in the same way that you can step up and walk away from a game of Yahtzee or code names, like you can do it with Dungeons and Dragons too, and you'd be like, wait a second.
Hold up.
So, also, hi Nico.
Hi Nico.
Good to see you.
Hey.
Nico has a hot take.
Yeah, ruling should be decided by the entire table, not just the GM. I am curious to hear your reasoning on that. My instinct is that is true for some things probably, but I don't think that should be like a matter of course. For the same reason that I think that it's important to preserve player agency in a game, but not necessarily player choice, right? Because like if you are arguing about what to do in the game, you're playing D&D. If you are arguing about the rules of D&D, I would argue you're not playing D&D. And so I think it is sort of a little bit... I think that there has... Like, the GM should in some way be... I think there is an unspoken social contract, or rather should be, right? The GM makes the rulings, but, like, the table has to kind of be okay with that. Like, heavily emphasized on, like, you know, the on the GM's side, because the GM probably has reasons for that, right? And but also that if the ruling is unfair, then I think the table gets a say, right? Then they can be like, all right, hold on a second, I don't think that's... So I don't know. I think I agree, kind of, but I also don't. I think that the more time you spend on consensus on something that may not matter beyond that moment, that's more time that you're not actually playing the game, and in theory, you came to the table to play the game. So
That's one of those
yeah.
things, like if it's a repeat issue, it's something that you can address before, after, or like as we were talking about, the kind of levels of communication between characters, between players, and outside, between people outside the game. Like that's one of those things that can be resolved at the highest level, not during the 3 hours a week that everybody has. Like you can resolve that in a group chat and be
Sure,
like, hey, so
yeah.
like in the future, how do you want to handle it when you make these
Right.
roles? Let's find a solution that we feel like is the
Yeah,
best thing for us.
For
and we
me,
can
and
talk it out.
in general, not that I, and this is not to say that you're wrong, Nico. I'm just, this is sort of, it could entirely just, I might be, that's why I was sort of saying that I'd be interested to hear like your reasoning on that, because you might be thinking about something that I'm not considering. But what I was going to say was that at the table, for me, when it comes to rulings, the most important thing is that we get back to the thing that we're all here to do, which is playing the game. And so I'm much more likely to make a ruling just sort of like this, and like, all right, this is how we're going to handle. I do it in Infinite Horizon all the time because I can never fucking remember how Insight works. I literally, Freeman can tell you, literally look it up every single week before we go live. I look up the Insight rules because I can never remember how they fucking work. But in the game, like especially on a streamed game, unless it's something that's likely to come up repeatedly, I'm probably much more likely to just sort of I don't want to build consensus. I just sort of want to like I'll ask. I'll be like, like I'll say, this is what, because of this and this and this, I think this is how we should handle this. Does that sound right? Does that sound fair? And I think that's okay. But trying to like, if it's something that's particularly contentious, like I think Nico's thought is a good one at like a completely healthy table, or in a situation where basically everybody is sort of on the same page. But in a situation where there's something that's contentious, that or could be contentious, I think this is a situation where the GM or somebody somebody has to be able to say, this is what we're doing, let's move on.
Yeah, I think that the whole table, like kind of having a having a consensus makes a ton of sense, is in particularly GM-less games. Like it makes a lot of sense there, because those games are kind of, TTRPGs are already a conversation, but those games are like really, really a conversation. GM-less ones, where it's kind of like each person is passing the kind of agency in putting in the storytelling work, right? But with GM games, I think it is kind of important to have one person where you're like, this is the person who makes at some point the final call on the ruling, with the understanding that that person is going to try and make the call that is in the best interests of the game continuing to be fun for all of us.
Because the thing is, there's lots of situations where like I've played with people who like aren't necessarily toxic to the environment of the table, but can get a little bit like contentious about rulings if given the opportunity, right? And like I think we sometimes have a tendency to, and this is not to say that anybody was saying this, I'm just like thinking for myself, we sometimes I think have a tendency of thinking of people who are contentious about rulings as being toxic and therefore must be excised from the group. And I think that's not always the case. Like that those are not necessarily the same thing, right? Like I tend to be very much a like rules lawyer player, but like in a way that I think I always say, hey, listen, so the rule says this, but it's your call, right? Like, I'll be like, it's your call how to handle this. So, yeah. Nico says, in my experience, when there is a ruling dispute, it's most likely because a player wants to do a thing that the rules don't 100% support, and at that point, having table consensus on how that thing should work is more healthy for the game, because the dispute changes from player GM to player table. It's harder to be sour about a ruling when it's a majority vote instead of a single person in power. See, I think I understand where you're coming from. I think this is less an issue of the whole table needs to be in consensus, and more uh, I think the problem maybe lies more in a reevaluation of what the GM's role actually is, um, as more of just sort of the person who decides the coin flip, basically the person who, because I've definitely also been in games where the GM was primarily interested in consensus on rules, and those disputes go on forever, and people are not, if nobody's going to make
Right.
a call, if nobody's there to make a call, those disputes can go on forever. And so I agree with the spirit of what you're saying, that I think it's important for, especially if it's a ruling that has lasting impact, right? um then I think it's important for there to be like discussion and group consensus. We've done that in our home game before, Freeman, where we've like
Mhm.
stopped and like actually like turned over what makes sense for a little while, right? And I think that's a good thing. That can absolutely be a good thing.
Yeah.
But if a ruling is turning contentious, I think the GM has to have the ability to be able to like say, "All right, listen, this is the final call. Let's proceed."
Hmm.
You know?
You sort of have to at
Yeah.
some point with certain things, right? Because otherwise you
Yeah.
stop playing the game and it becomes something else.
And like if it's still contentious at that point, like then that winds up being a conversation for, like I said, at the highest level of
Right.
of
Yeah.
things, like outside the game. Because
Right.
as Lucas said earlier, like if it's game night, you're here to play some Dungeons and Dragons. Like it's important to try and make rulings that you think that everybody will be okay with. But I think it's also important to trust your GM and like to trust your play group to communicate about those things and to check in with them. And this is like also part of the topic for tonight, is one of the ways to prevent that kind of like contention or like feeling sour about rulings is the understanding that you should feel okay going to your GM and be like, hey, that didn't feel great. Can we figure out a different way to do that? Or is there something that we can do differently
Mm-hmm.
outside of the game?
Yeah.
Because like we said, I think I agree with the take that like arguing about the rules of the game or like talking about the rules of the game isn't really playing the game. Deciding what you want to do with the rules is. There's like a
Right.
there's a line that you kind of tip on one side or another. Like deciding what I want to do with my character's ability to do things, executing the rules is playing the game, and then deciding like what is the rule,
Mm-hmm.
or arguing like what is the rule is kind of where you tip over into like, we've kind of stopped playing D&D and are now trying to figure out what the rules of D&D actually say.
Right. And I think oh, I had a thought about something that you said earlier, but then I got distracted. But um yeah, no. Well, this is oh, I remember what I was going to say. So, there's maybe an entirely separate episode of Ramblemancy that is now occurring to me that is like something to the effect of like the social contract of TTRPGs, like the right, because I think that is something that doesn't, like, we often in our conversations about TTRPGs, running them and like all this kind of stuff, we allude to that, but we talk around it a lot. But I don't ever think that I've heard a conversation specifically about like the social contract of TTRPGs, the sort of unspoken social
Hey, I
contract.
wrote that down.
Yeah.
And like I'm also not, I don't know that we are strictly qualified to say this is what it is, right? Because there's going to be some quibbling over like the specifics of like what the social contract is. But in this specific case, the reason I thought about it is because I think in this case the social contract of TTRPGs is that like when it comes to rulings in a GM'd game, right? The GM, the social contract is that the GM is under an assumption of making rulings in the sake in that are fair, right? And the players on their end, their end of that is that they are it is their responsibility to sort of speak up if they don't think those rulings are fair, right? If they don't think that that is what is happening, right? But it is also their responsibility to sort of accept the rulings when they're made, because
Mm.
otherwise everything breaks down. So like when fair rulings are made. Sorry, I should be clear. When fair rulings are made, it's the player's responsibility to sort of accept that, even if they kind of don't feel great. And then furthermore, I think it is on the GM side is the because like we could say like, oh yeah, players, if you don't like how something was ruled, you can bring it up after the fact. But like, I don't know about that one. I think that is sort of a little bit falls in kind of the purview of the GM's responsibilities. The GM's responsibility should be like after the fact to be like, hey, let's have it like, or to not even necessarily start the conversation, but at least make themselves available to the conversation, like open making themselves open to the conversation. Say like, listen, was there anything, were you guys okay with that ruling? Were you okay with this? Like, did this work out? You know, what do you think, right? Because I think
just like how we feel on anything you want to talk about from the game tonight, like is a good way to just like, here's the space.
Yeah. And so, oh, sorry, hold on real quick. Hermes said, no one can be happy with all the rulings, not with different classes and different players. When new levels and abilities pop, figure them out. Get the rule straight and keep it. I think, yeah, so that's, yes, I agree with that. I also do remember once seeing a piece of GM advice saying that if you make a ruling, then you must be consistent about that ruling forever. And I sort of disagree with that, right? I disagree with that particular notion because the whole point of a ruling is that, like...
Well played, sir.
All
well
right.
played.
Okay. All right.
Prefer to keep my rules gay. Thank you very much.
If I feel like the whole point of a ruling is that it is a call that is made in a scenario where the rules there are no rules for that situation, that specific situation, or there is no rule about how that specific thing would interact with the rules that are written or something like that, right? I feel like rulings by their very nature are about the specific circumstance, right? Like saying, I'm going to make this ruling now, and this will set the precedent for all rulings in cases such as this. It's D&D, not fucking, like, not the Supreme fucking Court, okay? It's like...
I really wish that we had the Law and Order, like, dong dong sound keeping the stream deck right now, like...
I think there's a certain amount of this. I think again, I agree with the spirit of that advice, right? Which is to say, be consistent about your rulings, but I don't agree with like make a ruling and then that becomes the rule forever, right? Because
there has to be a little.
Yeah, by its very nature, I think a ruling is pretty specific to a case, right? Not like. By all means, reference previous rulings by saying, well, we didn't do this last time in a similar situation, and then evaluate whether or not it applies here. I don't know.
Right. It's always open for, I think it should always be open for negotiation down the road because things change, the players change, the levels change, powers, whatever.
Yeah.
Negotiation should be open to that.
Yeah, because by the same token that a game's rules cannot account for every conceivable situation or permutation of a situation, you, the GM, can't do that either. So, like, making a ruling and saying this is the precedent now and forever is, I think, naive at best.
Plus, the Sith only thinks in absolutes.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Deals, yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine being in the Supreme Court and playing D&D. Hell, I would never play D&D with a lot of those people.
I was just going to say, you got a lot of... I can tell there are so many problem players on the Supreme Court among the Supreme Court justices already.
Right. Next episode of Ramblemancy, we're going to go through all the members of the United States Supreme Court and determine what type of player are they. Which one's the wang rod? Which one's the rules lawyer? Which one of them is the actor? Right? Like...
And then beginning our series on going through the United States Senate, sorting all of them into various categories.
Yeah. Oh God.
We've been talking around. Caitlin does smash or pass on Supreme Court justice.
No. No.
This has got to be a power play joke leaking over here.
Y'all, April Fool's was last week. Oh my God. I think it's more of a reference to Caitlin TikTok. But
Oh, okay. Yeah, I forgot. I forget which of my friends are on TikTok because I'm not on TikTok.
mm-hmm.
And so sometimes things will just like, and somebody will make a reference, and I'm like, this is very clearly a reference. I'm about 90% sure that it is a TikTok reference, but you're gonna have to explain it to old man John.
Yeah.
We've been talking around something though too tonight that I've been thinking about. April Fool's all month. We are choosing to celebrate April Fool's.
It's called April Fool's, not April 1st Fools.
Yeah, exactly. Fool me once, it's the first day of April, but fool me twice and it might still be the second day of April, but you can keep doing it for the whole month.
Yeah.
But no, like I was gonna say, we've been talking about something else that I think is important in this.
Joke's on you. I'm a fool 365 days a year.
Got him, baby. And I have a card for. Well, I have tarot cards for this.
That was not ready. Secret cap. Anyway,
this is taking me back to the time when I was playing Articles of the Arcana over on Friends Roll Dice.
Mm-hmm.
And I was playing a character class that was literally like the Fool card from the tarot. And at some point in the game, Matthew Gravlin stopped for a second after I had described something that I wanted to do, and he just looked straight at me and he was like, John, I mean absolutely no shade when I say this, but you are the best fool. And that's the energy that I strive to have 365 days a year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I can make Matthew simultaneously question his choice to run a game for me, and also be a little bit proud of me, then I've done my job well.
Amazing. Sorry, you were trying to talk about something relevant, and I
valiantly searching for a for a foothold.
Yeah.
But no, what I was kind of talking about was just in terms of players learning the rules as well, since we've been having a lot of conversations about rulings and rules and communicating about the rules. One of the things that I think is important in this on this end of things is taking a little bit of time to learn as best you can how the game works, or how your character works is a huge side.
Oh, did we lose John?
Did the wind do that?
No, Zoom restarted itself.
Oh, really? Shit. I think the window is gone on the stream too.
It should be back.
Okay, all right, there it is. It's back. Okay.
Wow. Whoa.
The Zoom the program Zoom restarted itself.
What? Come on,
Everything
Zoom.
else was still going. That's why people could still hear me, because my audio is not coming in through Zoom. My audio is coming in is direct. So
yeah, that nice crisp Steinberg audio.
That is so weird.
That is.
What was it? Was it Infinite Horizon, where it wasn't Zoom that restarted, it was OBS that restarted itself.
Yes.
Or it didn't restart, it just crashed. What is happening?
That's strange. I don't know why I thought it was a power fluctuation, because that would affect me too, because we were this close to each other.
Wow.
That was new.
This I know, right? This was a very murder movie, not gonna lie. I thought Lucas was about to die.
Yeah.
Zoom's haunted. What? Shh. Zoom's haunted.
Whoa.
Yeah, the classic. What? Zoom's haunted.
Well, all right.
I don't know how to come back from that.
I
Scene
don't
one.
either. I was making a point and I have kind of lost it.
Look, tonight, no, like apparently the universe does not want you to make your point. What?
Well,
you have a clap.
Take two. All right. So,
Wait a
John,
minute.
I think you were making. I don't know what you were talking about, but it was.
The glaze over the clapperboard.
How long have you had that?
Oh boy.
How long have you been waiting to use that?
All my life, but I just got it. I've always wanted one of these, but I think like a little over a month.
Wow.
Just waiting for the moment, and I think that was a pretty okay moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was brilliant.
Now we're
You
back.
made it. You had the restraint to not use that in the April Fool's stream, and I think that alone just like deserves a commendation there. Like,
Yeah.
You had the restraint to not even tell anybody that you had it. Incredible.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway,
No, there was a moment actually for the April Fools. I actually eyeballed it for a moment because there was a moment that was like halfway decent, but then it passed so quickly because you saw the episode. It was there was a lot going on, so it just kind of passed by.
I think Nico has a point, and I think we should talk to that. But what I remember John talking about was something about players and learning the game.
Yes, and like we've been talking a lot about rulings, and I don't know if there's a ton to be explored here other than just like a kind of something that I've been thinking about tonight. But we've been talking about like rulings and GMs making rulings, and GM kind of being like the final arbiter on those things. But you can, in some ways, like make those conversations much quicker and easier the more you know also about how your character works and how the rules work. And that's not saying that you as the player have to swallow the rule book of every single system that you play. If you're new to it, you're new to it, or if you're still learning it, that's whatever. Like we're all there at some point with every game or every system. We've all been new to playing TTRPGs at some point. But the more that you can kind of challenge yourself to know at least specifically how your character works and how the things that they do work, so that when you are asking for rulings like that, kind of where you can try and push, or like trying to flex things instead of just being like fully, how does this thing work? Is a way that you can take a lot of pressure off of the other players at the table and the GM.
Yeah, and like I think a good rule of thumb, I think, for people who are learning TTRPGs is to like make sure that you don't have to, like John said, you don't have to know all the rules of the game, but you should probably have a solid idea of how your character works. Because the GM, especially if you're playing D&D, the GM probably doesn't know. Like, not specifically anyway. And I think it's in a related topic. Also, players, do your GMs a favor, and like, if there is a rule that is not necessarily in dispute but maybe unknown, do your GMs a favor. And like, GMs have the pressure of like trying to keep the game together and running. Do your GMs a favor and like look up that rule for them. Because I will tell you right now, for me, especially on a streamed game, if I have the pressure of having to look up a rule in the moment, I am like 90% less likely to actually find it, even if I knew where it was before. So like, yeah, because there's that pressure of, anyway. So like, players, you know what's up. Anyway,
Thank you, Hermes.
yeah, thanks, Hermes. But I don't think there's too much more to be said about that. I think that's a pretty cut and dried situation. Like, I don't think there's a whole lot to be said. Like, so basically, to sum up, know no rules related to your character. Look up when there's a rule in dispute or unknown. Don't always assume the GM is going to like be the one to do it. Like, in theory, you've got some books too. You can look that shit up. And number 3, which I think Nico has stated very well here in the chat, in between your turns, if you have an idea of something you'd like to do, maybe spend some of your time looking up how that thing works. I think that's pretty much That's what I got. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much more to say about that. So I think it's worth going back to the topic that Nico brought up, which was the after talk, GM after talk.
Yes. Post game aftercare.
Let's see. Nico said, post game chat. What are your go-to things to bring up after a session as a GM? What is the thing you wish your GM would bring up more as a player?
I think I have not been running a ton of games recently, but I know usually it's usually just kind of a few simple questions that I tend to ask. But I know like for my home game, which has a lot of new players in it, it's not quite like did everybody have fun necessarily, like did everybody have fun today at the amusement park, like but it is a little bit like that. I'll pretty much just be like, how's everybody doing, do we have a good time, like anything anybody wants to talk about. Like I usually kind of just open the floor to it. And then I might just be like, like confused on rules. Like, is there like a scene or a thing that happened tonight that you wanna make sure we talk about, or like, investigate before the next time we play, like that kind of thing. I open it up basically on a few topics, which is just like, is there any like rules that people were confused about tonight? Is there anything pertaining to your character? Did everybody have fun? And those are kind of like the three areas that I personally, after a game, I'm like, how we doing? And I usually keep that kind of very casual, and as I can, if we're like after we're cleaning up and kind of puttering around or like sitting around the Zoom call, like sometimes I'll just like feel that out with a player while we're talking again sometimes too, and be like, oh yeah, this thing that happened, so like, and kind of not necessarily like go like on a deep dive about that thing, but just like see if I can create a space for them to talk about their character or how the game's going for them. And that's kind of my approach, and I realize that's kind of like a vague loosey-goosey sounding approach to it, but I've also run a lot of games at this point, so I'm kind of used to steering conversations in that way.
I think my answer to this is that I don't have go-tos necessarily, because this is not actually something that I do regularly, at least not in any sort of like structured way, right? Like I typically what I'll do more often than not is I will just bring up like some of my favorite moments. As a GM, I'll bring up some of my favorite moments from the session. And I'll just be like, "Oh man, it was so cool when you did this, or when so and so had this conversation, and like this one specific line was so good." Like that kind of stuff. I think that things in general that if I did it in a structured way that I would want to do is like I think I used to do this back when we first started our home game, Freeman. Where I would like periodically I would like take some time after the game to like I'd like end the game like maybe 20 minutes early or something like that, and I'd just sort of like stop and like go, all right, so how do you guys feel like this has been going so far? Like how do you feel like about the ratio of like role playing to combat to like whatever, right? And how do you feel like the combat encounters are going? Are they too much? How so? Would you like more? And I remember one time getting feedback from a player that like we do a lot of fights with single monsters. I think it'd be cooler if we had more fights with like multiple enemies or whatever. And like that was a fair criticism that at the time helped me realize that I had sort of fallen into a particular pattern in like my GMing, where I was like, here's a single boss monster. And I was just sort of doing that on repeat, and it was just a monster of the not so much monster of the week, but because there's lots of lead up, more like monster of the every couple of weeks. And that player telling me that was like was a good way of me recognizing that I had in fact fallen into sort of a pattern, which was useful information, because I had found that I inexplicably, even though I was having fun playing, like running D&D, I had inexplicably become bored, even though I was still having fun, and I couldn't like reconcile those things in my brain. And then my player said this, I was like, oh fuck, that's what it is. It's because I'm just doing the same, like, reskinned the same thing over and over again, and like there's not a whole lot. Like the only thing that's different is the context, but it's still, at the end of the day, it's like context, cool story, investigate some stuff, go to a location, fight a monster, wash, rinse, repeat, and like that was it. So yeah, boss rush mode, exactly, Orange.
It's very funny because Orange and Lucas both saw me playing the new Metroid Dread mode earlier today, which is boss rush mode.
So yeah, I used to do that a lot more, where I'd be like, "Hey, is there something that you wish that there could be more?" Here's an important point, and this is not limited to the usefulness of this particular tip is not limited to tabletop RPGs, but it is often better to, if you want actual feedback and you're trying to solicit feedback from people, especially if it's in real time, like face to face, don't ask if there's anything, if there's anything. Hold on, I'm trying to remember how I did this. The best way of asking that is asking if there's something that they would like to see more of, or something that they would like to see improved. Don't ask for a negative, because people are far less likely to give you honest answers or useful answers if you ask them for something that is negative. Like was there something that you didn't like? You're far less likely to get a useful answer from that than if you ask, is there something that you'd like to see more of?
Yeah, like asking, especially in contexts like that, where you're asking for a critique about something that you are doing, and sometimes that they probably view it as you are doing something for me. When you're talking about like player GM dynamic, like you are so much more likely to get constructive feedback when you ask kind of more specific, either neutrally or positively phrased questions.
Like is there something you'd like to see more of? Is there something that you feel you want to, is there something you want to focus on more? Is there
how is the balance of this thing? Do you want more or less of this thing or that thing? Like, you know, asking questions that are a little more specific about like that.
Specificity is a sort of separate thing. It's related, but a separate thing. I'm just talking about in terms of like just not asking for negative feedback. Don't ask for negative feedback, because you're far less likely to get useful input. And yeah,
nobody wants to be the professor who just bleeds red all over somebody's paper. Like, nobody does. Everyone is afraid that they're going to be, so nobody will be.
Yeah. The trick is figuring out how to ask for negative feedback without making it sound like you're asking for negative feedback.
The trick is to ask for a critique without sounding like you're asking for a critique.
Hey, what's the shittiest thing I did tonight?
Just great.
I need you to tell me every single one of the ways in which I was an ass tonight.
Yeah.
Like,
I want you to look me in the eyes and tell me every single horrible thing I've done to you today.
No, come here, look at me. Tell me what a piece of garbage I am.
Like, right? You're just not gonna get what you want out of that. I mean, unless like, no, even if that's something that you're into, like, you're probably not gonna get that from somebody who you just sort of spring that on. What are some areas that I can improve? I'm on the fence about that one. Like, in some cases, I think you're right, but I am on the fence about that one, mainly because
it just depends on. I think it depends on how well you know your group and what kind of dynamic you have. I think that's a question. I think that's a question that's very dependent on who you're asking it of, and
especially
what your relationship is
if like sort of in some context, I think that's true. Now I've sort of shifted back to the context of TTRPGs. I'm not sure if that's a useful question for a GM to ask their players, because there's a really good chance the players don't know how, like, an area that you could improve. They're much more likely to have recognized something that they didn't like in the game, something that didn't feel right, that didn't feel like it was going far enough. But if you phrase it in sort of as a general, like, what are some areas in which I could improve? Again, excellent question, but specifically in the context of of TTRPGs, from like GM to players, I think that's a less useful one. Because not that it's a less useful question, but you're going to get probably less useful feedback from asking your players that question, because I mean, my experience anyway is that players aren't necessarily going to know like enough about GMing to like. I think it's a great question to ask other GMs. If there are other GMs in your game, then it's a great question to ask. I think that's an excellent question to ask. But if you're asking players who don't GM, I think it's a less useful question. So taking that back out to the general context, I think that's a great question to ask peers. To ask like your like peers, people who are doing the same thing or have done the same thing that you're doing.
Yeah, if you have mostly people in your game who are players and not GMs, then it becomes a less useful question.
But it's a great question. It's a great example of a question like asking for genuine feedback, but phrased in a positive rather than a negative. It's like a good example of that type of question.
Not what am I doing wrong,
right?
But what could I do better?
Exactly.
Nico said above, one of the things that I really like doing, and John can attest. Sorry, I'm going to address the joke
damn
first.
Edge of it.
Tie me up and complain about my GMing, daddy. This is why I have a bonk emote.
Bonk.
Bonk.
Freeman's dead. Freeman died.
Yeah, that one got Freeman.
I just read it, but I never imagined what voice or how it was being said, and now. Thank you.
Yeah, anytime. I've been on the voice acting bit today.
Sweet. A very large truck just passed by. I don't know if you heard it. So
I think I can hear it.
Hey, you sent it my way. I just went.
That is a very fast truck.
The great overcyclist graces us once more. It is summer again.
What were you saying, John, before this happened?
Anyway, before all of this happened and before we had to bonk chat, Nico was saying one of the things that I really like doing, and John can attest to this, is asking my players if there are any scenes that they didn't get to and make sure to either give them the time to do that thing next session or quickly play out a small scene to retroactively fit into the game. That is something that Nico does a lot, and it's fun. I like that a lot. Of it's wound up pushing the game in fun and interesting directions when there's like that kind of narrative check-in of afterwards of like, is there anything that y'all wanted to get to or any scenes that you think would be fun? And it's a great way to open up kind of in post game if some people need to like zip off to work or go make a meal or something like that, then like the remaining player, like say these two players who want to have a scene together can just like real quick have a 5-10 minute exchange or something, and then that can maybe inform something that happens next game. And so that is I think a fun thing to do, just in terms of the game.
I also like this other thing that Nico said. Also, dear players, you can also ask for tips and feedback. Please do. It's not only the GM who can improve. Yes, and I'm saying this this is my emphasis on this is coming from me as a player, not me as a GM. Absolutely do that, because I used to be a garbage player. Like, I was not fun to have at a table. Like, I play this down a lot, and I think it's possible some of my previous GMs may say differently, but I promise you they are misremembering. Because like I was like, as I said before, like when I first started, I've mostly been a GM. Like, even since my early days of TTRPGs, mostly been a GM, and so most of my experience as a player early on was spent with me sitting there going like, getting really irritated, like, well, I wouldn't have ruled that. I wouldn't have ruled it that way. That's not how I would have handled that. And like being unable to let that go. But I spent more time as a player since then. And I gotta say, it is very, very possible to improve as a player, not just in terms of like the actual game, but also in how you as a person behave at the table. So yes, players, do ask for feedback and never assume that because your job is different than the DM's, you cannot improve or you have nothing to improve.
It takes me back to a few weeks ago when we were talking to Sam Delev, and they were talking about like just TTRPGs as a hobby, there being, and like games and mechanics, there being so many like things to learn and skills to practice, and kind of just like anything else, like these kind of fun performative conversational games are things that we develop skill at. And playing in them is also, as with anything in our lives, a skill.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always room for improvement there, and asking other players, asking like your GM, all be good ways to facilitate those kind of conversations. And like we were talking about before, frame it in the same way. Don't be like, what are all my problems as a player?
Point out very specifically and with devastating precision every single one of my specific flaws.
Yes. If you want to ask those kind of things, just ask like, hey, is there anything that I could like do better at as a player? Or is there, those sorts of questions, kind of taking it back to what Maggie said. And I think that's an easier question for the average player to ask the average GM, because if you're GMing a game, you probably have played them, played in them.
And related, and this is something that some my players, especially in Infinite Horizon, have asked me a significant amount, which I've always appreciated this question, which is the question of, is there anything that we can do as players to make your job easier?
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's for a specific session, or like, I think often Caitlin will ask me that question when she knows that there's sort of like a time element involved in this upcoming session. Like if she knows we're trying to finish out an arc by a specific date, Caitlin will ask me that question.
Mm-hmm.
Sam asked me that question in the Avatar game. Things like that. Like that's also a very helpful thing, especially if you're on a streamed game. So like, especially if you're on a streamed game.
Yeah, Sam described themselves as me silly himbo talent, but I was like, hold on there. You do your job very well.
I also wanted to point out, Hermes said earlier, the best compliment I got recently as a new DM was, "You're really accommodating and understanding. That's what makes a good GM. Everything else is just practice." That's awesome. That's a great compliment. See, it's great when you get stuff. As a GM, it's wonderful when your players see you and then like say things to you. It's like, it's one thing to be appreciative of your GMs. It's a totally different thing to like be appreciative to your GMs. Those are separate things, and they are related, but one does not necessitate the other.
Yeah, and this is, I don't know, this is still loosely related to the topic of communication, but like, we can butter each other up. If somebody did something cool after the game, recognize it.
Yeah.
Like, odds are if somebody was like, that thing that you did, like with whatever ability, or like that like quip that you had, or that scene that you started, like that was so cool. Like, just like stuff like that is an excellent way of, like, we've been talking about searching for ways to improve, right? That's an excellent way to give people positive feedback about things that they're doing well, or cool things that they did, is just remarking on something that you thought that they did that was neat. First of all, that feels good to them. Or like appreciating your GM or the other players for things that they do. Like, first of all, that just feels good. But second of all, that is its own form of like positive reinforcement. Be like, okay, so these are things that I'm doing that are good, right?
Yeah. Nico makes an interesting point here, which is, this is more of a player-to-player communication thing, but one of my pet peeves is players unnecessarily keeping information about their characters from other players. Like, unless you have a cool reveal planned or are planning a character that is supposed to be more ambiguous in their powers or something like that, there's not a reason to keep shit secret. In fact, having your fellow players know what drives your character and how they function opens up so many more possibilities for cool shit. Yeah. Yes. Sorry, I had a different thought. I had a thought about this while I was reading it the first time, and now it escapes me. But yeah, that's a fair point, I think. And yeah, I had a thought about that, and it's gone now. But continue, John.
I, as a human being, am one of the I think as far as people that you will meet that care about spoilers, I care maybe in like the bottom 15% of caring about, like I'm maybe in the bottom 15% of caring about spoilers. I almost fundamentally don't give a shit, because the act of experiencing it is so much of the enjoyment for me, which is maybe related to my whole like kind of analysis brain. I like picking the things apart and like noticing things about them as I'm watching them. But like it's kind of the same here, like where if there is knowing more in this instance, I can still play my character like they don't know. And frankly, it gives me even more opportunity to just lean into the fact that my character doesn't know this, but I know. And now I can generate irony and tension in the game off the back of that.
I remembered what I was going to say, which is that I can absolutely see why this would be a pet peeve. It is personally not one of mine, but for me, it's more of a situation where like the game can be much improved by just sharing outright stuff about your character, but it's not. I don't see it's for me personally. It's not a pet peeve when people keep secrets about their characters. That's but I can absolutely see like there's absolutely very valid arguments for it being somebody's pet peeve and for why it bothers some people. I just happen to not be one of those people, but but I also, that said, I do genuinely believe that sharing more about like what drives your character and about who they are as a person can improve the game. Like that time when John and I made characters and we realized, wow, these characters are going to hate each other. And then we spent a whole bunch of time out of game discussing exactly how that conflict would play out.
Yep. We were like, these characters are going to hate each other for the first 3 levels, and then they are going to wind up very good friends.
Yeah, because we realized very early on that like our characters just fundamentally would not understand each other. Like fundamentally like misjudge and misunderstand each other. And then we were like, okay, we could do something cool with this. And then we spent a bunch of time out of game talking about how that conflict would play out. And that was very cool.
That's really cool.
So yeah, I am firmly in the camp that sharing information about your characters is good. I also on the other hand, it can be fun to like have people in your game like just not knowing what your character class is and be just like intensely curious about it. It can be fun, but do be careful and be aware that not everybody else at the table is going to find that fun. So, including the GM, they might not.
Yeah. And like there were still things that Lucas and I didn't tell each other about our characters, but like, or things that we just kind of alluded to and left a little bit vague to each other. Like you can still leave a little bit of, if you want to like, fine, keep those secrets, you know, you can do a little bit of that while still communicating it. Like there's a lot of, it's a volume slider. And there's a lot of ticks in between 0 and max, right? So there's a lot of room for adjusting like how much information you share, what you keep to yourself to play up for the dramatics. So, and there are some things that are like fun to plan, like big reveals like that. I think I managed to keep a lid on the fact that one of my characters was an Aasimar for a few levels. And then, but like, of course, the whole time, like kind of inkling it along. And like, I think it was pretty clear to like the players in the game that there was something different about the character as we were going along, but you know, very intentional about that. And I'm piss poor at keeping secrets.
Nico says, oh, absolutely, it can be fun. I just don't think not sharing things about your character should be the default, and to me it often seems like it is. That's really interesting. That hasn't been my experience, but like I agree that shouldn't be the default, because games can be so much more fun when everybody understands what's happening, when everybody understands stuff about the other characters, because then like that leaves so many opportunities for like strengthening the relationships between characters, or at least deepening them, right? Not necessarily strengthening the relationships, but deepening the relationships. Yeah, because the more you know about the other people at your table, the more you, and this is very important, listen to me right now, the more you as a player can help them achieve the fantasy that they specifically came to the table looking for. And that is called being a good player. Yeah. I don't have more to say about that. That's
I don't know. That's like
that was kind of the thing. Yeah. I feel like we've just like we're at the end of the stream. I feel like we just started talking about this. Like I feel like we've just started to get into the real topic, you know? Like
this happens sometimes where we choose topics and then like there just winds up being so much to talk about and we find our way there eventually. But
yeah. Not just talking about character bits either, just I think players should share their characters' mechanical yeah, that too. That's also pretty important, especially if you have multiple spellcasters in the group who might have overlap.
Oh yeah, well like when this is the first thing that I think of, like when Caitlin was guesting in the Dreamwell Chronicles pre-stream, like I remember she was playing a cleric of hers and Anna was playing Cassie, also a cleric, and the same thing also happened in our home game. Caitlin played the same cleric with Lucas's cleric, and it would always be this conversation of like, okay, so what spells are you?
I was like, I'll tell you right now, my cleric he prepares 0 healing spells. So like,
yeah, like who's going to be the fighty cleric and who's going to be the utility cleric?
Yeah.
Like basically was the conversation. So like I highly, especially in very tactical games like D&D, highly encourage those kind of conversations among players. Like there's no need to keep the fact that you have Colossus Slayer or that you have a Paladin aura or something like that secret or to yourself, like when it also stands to benefit.
This is a totally separate issue. It's not at all what we're talking about right now, but can we talk about hot take? Here we go. Ready? I'm just gonna.
Yep. Oh, picking up the mic. Picking up the mic.
Oh boy.
Okay, here we go. 1 second.
Sounds so much different.
Yep.
Sometimes metagaming is good. Okay. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For
Lucas.
example, hit points. That's fucking metagaming. But you should be doing that. You should be talking about hit points, because if you're not talking about hit points, your cleric is useless. Like, or the healer, whoever it is, doesn't have to be the cleric.
Like there was a moment in an episode of an actual play that I watched recently where the GM said to a player, and that kind of system knowledge is how you get yourself rewarded, like, or something to that effect. Right. And the player had done something extraordinary, like coordinating with another player, like between like some kind of like grenade and attaching it to like an automaton. And then like the player was knocked out of the automaton. The grenade went off and blew up and ended like a whole bunch of enemies. It was a very clever use of a bunch of different things, all like well within the rules. But that's metagaming. Like the metagaming is okay within a certain, like I said earlier, volume sliders. There's a Goldilocks zone of okay of metagaming that is okay, and a good chunk of metagaming fits in that slice of the pie.
I was gonna say something else and it's gone now. So before this becomes a whole other full-blown conversation about metagaming, because I feel like we could have an entire episode of Ramblemancy where it's just me ranting about, or actually the whole episode is just me rolling my eyes at what people consider metagaming that actually isn't, or at the very least isn't bad metagaming.
We do smash or pass on takes about metagaming.
Ramblemancy episode whatever. Smash or pass, metagaming, smash or pass. Like, anyway,
hot takes are always all over Twitter. Twitter is basically a hot take machine.
There sure are some opinions on Twitter about
Twitter.
D&D.
One of my friends said this at some point, and it was a very catchy turn of phrase, and he's very good at generating those. But I believe the thing that he said was Twitter is an engine designed to maximize human suffering, and I was like, that sometimes you were a little florid in your description of some things, but I think you're pretty spot on this time, pal. Someday I'll stop clipping things. Please don't.
Thanks for clipping that, Hermes. I didn't actually notice that you had clipped it, but thank you.
Thank you so much for the clip.
All right, we're this is the end of this episode, so we're gonna go. Oh man, I tricked myself, you guys, because we started we started the actual broadcast a few minutes early, and so I was like, all right, well, we're going over right now, but no, now I have tricked myself into ending more or less on time. So I've tricked myself, and it worked. I did not do it on purpose, but here we are. It is the end.
Goodbye.
Anyway, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Sorry, John, what were you saying?
No, I was just you were thanking everybody for coming along. I was just saying we have theoretically some announcements, of course, of next week. We have, barring any interventions of fate or giant strange eldritch monsters invading from the next dimension over during the week, we will be having a normal week of streaming as usual in Too Deep on Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, Infinite Horizon at 6 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday, and this I had to think about it for a second. And Friday, catch us again here for this very show on this very channel, Ramblemancy, where we sit down with you, chat, ourselves, and maybe a guest, and just talk about whatever is on our minds. If you like what we do here, there are a plethora of ways to support us. We have the most consistent and best way currently to support us is our Patreon. We have a ton of cool content that goes up there, from like tool chests and like tables and ready to use content in Tabletop Tool Chest that goes up a couple of times a month. We have a media club just about whatever we've been watching or consuming, listening to, games we've been playing. If you're looking for recommendations, that's a good place. We also have a series of TTRPG shorts, more bite-sized content than our regular actual play content, about hour-and-a-half episodes. We have one up right now, Tales from Night City, and we are working on the next one, which revisits the universe of Dungeons and Dorm Rooms, our very first actual play here on the channel set in an arcane university. Lots of great things in our Patreon, but if you want to just drop us a one-time donation, we do also have the Streamlabs tip jar and a coffee. Both of those are excellent places to just drop us a one-time donation and your support means the world to us. If you want to keep up with us after the show, there's something, if you're on the VOD squad and you have something that you want to add to the conversation, there's a Ramblemancy channel in our Discord. Which cord you say? Discord. We have a lovely community that is in the habit of greeting each other at the beginning of their various time zones every single morning. It is the sweetest thing about being in there. You can catch us, and if your Discord is actually linked to your Twitch and you're subscribed, you do get some of our Patreon benefits. So being around all of these places gets you access to us and cool rewards. What's not to like?
Yeah. And I feel like we don't say this anywhere close to enough, but links to all of that stuff, if you're watching on YouTube, links to all that stuff is in the description. So you can find it down there. It's also in the chat here on Twitch, but if you're on YouTube, you won't see that. So, yeah, that's what, that's what I got.
Tervanowitz says, excuse me, D&DR throwback, inject it into my veins. Soon, TM.
TM. Mm-hmm. And in that vein of throwbacks, I will just go ahead and on behalf of one Fern, subscribe. All right.
Subscribe.
So, thank you, Rooms. Thank you everyone for tuning in tonight, for hanging out with us, for sharing your thoughts. We will see you on Tuesday for In Too Deep. But if not, we'll see you the next time you decide to come roll with us. Good night and good zone.